Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be back to Oregon and specifically to Portland. This is probably my fourth time.
Yeah.
I've played here before and just played 2 concerts in the last couple of days. This is not the easiest time for all of us with COVID, but I was happy to see that quite a few people showed up and were very enthusiastic and supportive of the performance. So I had a great time and happy to be back playing concerts.
Yes, it was a wonderful, delightful concert, both of them, and in particular for audiences of this video years from now. We went through 2 years of lockdown and 2 years wearing masks. We are sitting across from each other with no mask. 5 years ago, that would not be a surprise to anyone. And probably the most difficult time for us right now was we were just coming out of this, and we had another variant that came through, and so people have been a little bit cautious. But the audience that came were so appreciative, so moved by the music and the sense of community that we share when we hear music live. So I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. First off, about how did you become a guitarist? I mean, how early did you start, and in particular your parents' role in your development?
Well, I was exposed to music since a very young age. My father played a little bit of the 7-string Russian guitar, and he was self-taught, but he knew quite a few things. He would always come home from work and pick up the guitar and play some Russian songs. So that was always a model for me, and I naturally gravitated towards guitar. My mom also loved music very much, and she played some piano. And when I was 5 years old, she decided to take me to a music school. At the music school, when we arrived, they conducted some kind of ear test and decided that I should play either violin or the piano. And naturally, I started crying, saying, I want the guitar. Just the guitar, nothing else. And so it happened. I was only 6 years old when I started taking lessons, but the rule was that I have to be at least 9 years old because of the size of the instrument and endurance of the fingers. And luckily my teacher at the time, he made an exception for me, and he took me on, giving me some melodies that he originally composed for me, and it was just a very exciting time of my life studying music. So I studied with this teacher. His name was Mikhail Grigorievich Sokolov, as far as I remember. Unfortunately, I heard that he's no longer alive. So I studied with him for 2 years, and then I switched to a different teacher. Yuri Vassiliev was his name. And I studied with him for 2 years. He was a student himself at the time at the conservatory studying guitar, and he was a very strict teacher. He was giving me all kinds of exercises, demanded certain hours of practice per day. I got a taste of the Russian music school a little bit before I left Russia when I was 10 to Israel. When I moved to Israel, I continued taking lessons with a teacher at my middle school. He was a fantastic teacher who exposed me to lots of very well-known pieces written for guitar, like Romanza, like Asturias. I was on fire. it was it changed my life. I could even say, actually, well, I should say that music has literally changed my life in so many ways. Because of immigration, because of moving to a different country, it was extremely difficult to adjust to new language, to new environment. Basically, you're starting over at a new place. And I faced lots of challenges. And music was an outlet for me. I felt grounded. It gave me a sense of confidence, and really helped me with my confidence as a person. Because when you move to a new place, you have you don't feel grounded, you don't feel secure, you don't feel safe. And music provided all of those elements to me. So I struggled in school, I struggled with new environment, new friends. But because of music, I was able to overcome those struggles, and as I mentioned, it literally changed my life. It brought me to the US, it brought me to study music on a high level at the universities here in the US, and allowed me to even stay in the US, become a citizen at this point. So after studying with my teacher in Israel for 2 years, at some point he said, well, it's time for you to move on to a strictly classical teacher who's, his name is Yaron Hasson. He studied in London at the, I think it's the, is it the Royal Conservatory in London? And he was absolutely amazing. We became friends. We had very, very long and inspiring lessons, and he became a role model for me. At that point, I knew this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I was supposed to go to the army. In Israel, everyone has to go to the army at 18, and I already started all the preparations for it, all the checks, and there was a process to do that. But also at the same time, I heard the recording of Manuel Barrueco. And when I heard that recording, I immediately was stunned. It was like nothing else I've heard before. I looked him up. I even sent him an email saying, well, my name is Yuri, I'm a guitarist living in Israel. What ended up happening, he asked me to send my recording to him. So I made a little tape recording, sent it to him. He wrote back, he said, that's great, can you make a video recording? I did not know where this was going at that time. And I remember the challenges of making a video recording at the time, because Israel has the different video systems. So I had to go somewhere to get it converted, sent it. Apparently conversion didn't work well, had to do it again. Second time he got it, he was able to watch it. He said, great, come study with me at the Peabody Conservatory of the Johns Hopkins University. I applied to the school, I was accepted, and then I got the cost, how much it costs to go to the school. And that was a no-brainer. I had to say, no thank you, this is not happening. And I remember I had a trip with my aunt who came visiting from Russia, and we went to Jerusalem we did like a tour, and we stopped at the Western Wall. We put the tradition is to put a note into the wall, and I am by no means a religious person and never was, but that was a spiritual experience for me. The same day I got home, I got an email saying, we're giving you full scholarship, come to the US to study with Manuel Barrueco. So even though I was not a religious person, I think at that moment I felt
You found a religion.
The stars aligned in a certain way, and that was a power that was beyond me by far. And from that point, my life has changed. I came to the U.S. I lived in the dorms. I had all the food, the room and board paid off for me. I did not have to pay for school, and I was studying with Manuel Barrueco for 5 years. Well, it was 4 years for undergrad, and then another year for a graduate performance diploma, GPD. So that was an extremely moving and life-changing experience for me. I will never forget it. And it only made me love music even more. It went from being a very strong passion that grounds me, that gives me a sense of, it gives me so many things. It teaches me about the world, and it teaches me so much about myself every day. To this day, every day, I look forward to practicing, I look forward to discovering new things, learning new music, meeting new people, learning from them. It just brings so many beautiful things to life in so many ways. So being a musician can enrich someone's life so much. It's way more than just you locked in a practice room all day, playing for the walls. It's relationships, it's experiences, it's travel, it's inspiration. It's fantastic. So yeah, that's how I ended up in the U.S. And then I went to the Yale School of Music for my master's, where I studied with Benjamin Verdery. That was also a phenomenal experience, being at such a prestigious place with so many talented people that were not necessarily musicians, but I made many friends there, and then I moved to New York, and then I moved to California. That's where I am now, based in Mountain View, California. Yeah.
So it's an amazing story in the aspect of how you started in Russia and how your early experiences with music began with family and your parents. You actually went to a music kind of conservatory at a very young age, and I want you to maybe share a little bit about how that contrasts to the way we see music education in this country, and how that empowered you at a very young age to have a very age-appropriate experience about music, and especially the intervals. I'd like you to include that. What was it like to have a formal music school when you were like 6?
Yes, I started at a music school when I was 6. Well, Russia has a very organized system for studying music. You do 10 years of music school, then you go to something called, it's like not quite undergrad, but it's before you start undergrad. It's called училище. So I'm not sure how many years you do that. I never got to that. I left Russia before I got there, and then you go to a music conservatory after that. So it was very organized in the sense that as a child I had to take music theory, I had to take choir. I think there were some other subjects that I had to take. And one thing that you wanted me to talk about is how we studied about intervals. I remember that we were sitting in a classroom, and the teacher would... So we were sitting in a classroom, and the teacher would play us an interval, and we would have to raise a card with a picture of an animal. For example, if it was a minor or a major second, it would be a porcupine with spikes. So the idea was that if the interval is dissonant, we associate it with something sharp, and so different intervals had different animals, of course, and that kind of helped me shape, my idea of what a sound sounds like, what it feels like.
And with that, I mean, as you're hearing, you use the word sharp, but also there's an emotional response to hearing an interval, and you're associating with an animal, I mean, an out kind of feeling, and that's interesting. That there's not just the association with an animal to make it easy to recognize, but also a perception of an emotional response to pain.
Yes.
Yeah. In that particular example, when we hear sometimes intervals, we're not always aware of the feeling. So they cultivated that in your early training, so that you'd be.
Yes, I don't remember all the animals, but I do remember there was something very open for the perfect intervals, for the fifth especially, and for the octave.
So this is for another discussion sometime later, because I really think that everything that you outlined about your background and this element of the schooling is relevant to how we hear music, how we respond to music, and sometimes it's something that is intuitive, but it is a perception of what we feel and how we perceive the world. And it's also an expression of what we feel and what we're expressing to the world. So those two things are really important for a musician. Because one, you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing to communicate to someone else. So musicians don't practice just for themselves. They practice with the idea of how is this going to be perceived by someone else? How can I cultivate this feeling? And that aspect of what you felt becomes a part of how you understand and be able to express it as well. So and then you touched on this a little bit, just a hair, that transition from a secure life as a young age, and suddenly I'm gathering right about the age of 10, you are now just seeing all the world turn. You have to learn to speak in another language. You have to relate to new people, and the only firm friend you had was that 6-string guitar that you had bonded with. And through it, you shared all your secrets and feelings and so forth. That was very important.
I remember we lived in this 5-story apartment building, and at the bottom there is this basement. Lots of empty space with pipes. And I would just go there and spend 6 hours straight doing my own thing with the guitar, practicing on my own. That was the really, really amazing time of my life, because that's how I learned to spend time with myself and really being able to concentrate and work with my craft. And
it was interesting to me too that you found two really wonderful teachers. The first teacher you have in Israel is one that really set a much more established foundation for your guitar skills, and at the same time at some point recognized that you'd be best served to move to another teacher. And some teachers would not do that. They'd keep you for the rest of their, as long as you were going. But
I recognized that at the time. I felt very grateful, and it was extremely difficult for me to take that step. It was not an easy decision to make, because I loved my teacher and I learned so much from him. And of course, I could have learned a lot more from this teacher. But I have to say that was an important step in my development. I do not regret, looking back, making that decision, because I needed a stronger technical foundation at the time, and the new teacher was able to give me that. So I'm very grateful to that teacher who made that choice to tell me that I should move on. Yeah.
So you developed, perhaps with this teacher and subsequent teachers, we'll talk a little bit about how do you approach a piece of music. Because clearly, when you performed the other night, there was a lot of complexity to the music itself. And in listening to your performance of Bach, you displayed a very clear understanding of phrasing, of the balance between the voices and general structure. And yet, it wasn't just that. There was an expressive outlet that came through. And these are all contribute to the final product, which is unified and congruent to each other. That the concept of the piece and your emotional expression of it. And the audience, of course, responded very, very enthusiastically. But it's not an accident. People will say, "Oh, you're such a talented young man." But the reality is countless hours. And as you were recovering from fatigue, you got up pretty early to make sure that you were fully prepared to put on the best program that we've had for many, many years. So.
Well, I have a couple of words to say about this thing that you mentioned when people say, "You were just talented." I used to say I don't believe in talent, but now I think I changed it a little bit. I think what talent is, it's lots of different things together. I think it's discipline. I think it's creativity. I think it's well, of course, hard work. Being able to get inspired. It's so many things together. It's not some kind of miracle that you're born with and you no longer have to work at. Of course, some people some things are easier for them, but every person has their strengths and weaknesses. And what I think, for me, what talent is to be able to work on your weaknesses. It's not. Some people say, "Well, just focus on your strength and develop those." But personally, I think the attention deserves to be given to the weaknesses.
I completely agree, which segues into my question about. I was watching Yuri practice in preparation for the concert. And I noticed too that all the music's on the iPad, and it's not just notes, there's different colors. And I noticed you're very detailed about what you write, but I don't get the colors. What are the colors about?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's what I do is, recently I mostly have been performing with my iPad with the music in front of me. But it's not because I don't have the music memorized. I mostly have it memorized, unless it's some new music that I have not performed much, or I learned it recently. So the coloring actually is me knowing where to draw my attention to when I perform. So let's say I make a mistake, or let's say I forget about something I should remember about. Or, for example, if it's some kind of dynamic change, let's say crescendo. And in my practice, if I miss it, if I know that I forgot to do it, I will highlight it. And the next time I play it, I will see it right there, and it will jump out from the music, and I will not forget to do it. So it's kind of knowing yourself, knowing what you might forget, and making sure that it doesn't happen.
I just interrupt for this part. So to me, I hope that you, the viewer, picking up on this, the importance of why music is so important for children and their experience is exactly what Yuri is talking about as well. And that is to be able to recognize your shortcomings and to take positive steps to improve. and to correct those shortcomings, to overcome them, rather than just simply accept them and to toss them aside, or even worse, to come to the belief that they don't exist. To be able to recognize your shortcomings is the first step to being able to achieve greater results. And you get that from, in part from your teachers, and in part probably because that's the kind of person you are. That's probably been with you for a lot longer.
I think I can even say I take it to a bit of an extreme level. Like, I notate so much in my music. I mark every single fingering. It gives me a sense of I know where I'm coming from. I know this is where I am, and what if I try to do something different? I know what changes I've made. I keep track of things. It makes it very, very quantifiable for me. So I think keeping a record of what changes you're trying to make and what works and what doesn't helps you learn about what actually works, which direction to go to, not leaving things to a chance as much as possible.
So I'd like to segue it backtrack a little bit about the music that you select. So we had talked a little bit about, we get, as quote, classical guitarists, we get told we're a classical guitarist, and that means a certain pejorative idea that people either think that you are really tied to tradition and don't look at the rest of the world, or if you're in depth with their style of guitars, that you know nothing about classical music. And as we were talking, you look at this as being a musician as a very holistic experience, that it doesn't exclude other forms and styles of music. You have your preferences, but those are personal preferences that you have made choices about. And so I noticed that you played the Bach Partita No. 2, and then we segued to this very modern piece which had elements of jazz, of rock, of Russian folk music, and counterpoint that would be, I suppose, reminiscent of Bach, but there would be no doubt that they're worlds apart. So how is it that what draws you to select certain pieces of music, and how would you contrast the difference between how you approach a piece by Bach or Sohr or Giuliani or some of the people of the traditional repertoire, as opposed to a piece of music that's so challenging and very different in style from all of that?
Well, let me say this first. I've heard this notion before, directed at students. Make sure that you do not do what other people have done. Do something differently. I have a bit of a trouble with that. I think every human is different. I think we don't need to try to be different for the sake of being different. We need to trust that who we are is already enough. So let me bring that back to to the question. So when I play whatever music it is, I am playing it. I am the performer, so it goes through my system. I will automatically have an imprint on that. Yet, I still try to understand when the music was written, during what time. If I could learn a little bit about the composer, about what was happening in his or her life, that's important. I would never play music that was written during Baroque era same way as it was written during classical era. The styles were completely different, the culture was different, the art was different. So for example, Baroque music uses a lot of ornamentation. There are stylistic choices that you could make that fit the style. There are some things you would not do. So having some understanding of that is extremely helpful. Classical music is a little more reserved, I would say. It's a little more brilliant in its melodies. The melodies are very singable. Baroque music is more about the architecture, the structure, the harmony. And again, it's so hard to describe with words. One really has to hear the comparison between the styles. I think listening to music is super helpful. Listening to different styles. And I personally, I don't limit myself to listening to a style of music. I turn on whatever I think gives me, I can learn something from it. I rarely just put music for pleasure. I don't think I really do that anymore. I usually put on music that I can really intellectually get stimulated about. I cannot really have music as background. Unless it's... Yeah, I don't think I do. I don't think I do.
I did a number of years back. I had the pleasure of meeting Aaron Copland, the great American composer, and not personal. It was in context. It was the visit to the university. He conducted some of his pieces, and then he subjected himself to questions by students. And someone asked, about that very question. He said, "Please don't listen to my music while you're doing anything else, like driving the car or doing the dishes. It's not intended for any of those purposes. It's intended to be fully appreciated as a work of art." And it's interesting is that we were talking a little bit about this. As instrumentalists, we face a special challenge in that our music doesn't have words, and sometimes people consider that a deficit. But as an instrumentalist, I'm pretty sure that you feel the same way, we consider it an asset because there are many ways to tell a story. And instrumental music allows the performer and the listener to have their own complete experience, separated by the fact that your two brains are, and many brains, a larger audience, are interpreting those sounds differently. The language that is being expressed, the melodies, the harmony, the dynamics, they express our basic human language, which is emotional and intellectual, both of them together. It's a very interesting blend. And yet, as the performer expressing a piece of music and you have a story to tell, the listener listening to that same story is hearing a different set of circumstances, but the emotional impact has symmetry that actually bonds that communication together in a completely unique fashion and would not be possible with words, because words would make it a little bit more black and white.
Yeah, they make things more concrete.
Yeah. And sometimes composers or their publishers over the years have thought of this deficit, quote deficit, and so they try to help it along, give it a title, the Moonlight Sonata, the New World Symphony, those type of things.
It's interesting. I find that there are people who cannot relate to music that does not have words. They don't know how to process it, and I think there is a certain amount of preparation is required to understand, to interpret what is being communicated with non-verbal peaceful, for example. And without music education, that is practically impossible to do.
Part of that is because that aspect of music communication is more of an abstract language. We have dots on a page, and as you're making marks on it with fingering, the fingering changes, so there's a complexity to the map of figuring out how to accomplish this piece with specific goals, and recognizing that some fingering is going to be more advantageous than another. That's an analytical part. Then there's the other analytical part that has to do with harmony and how it relates to tension and release. That's another part. And you're conveying all of those things when you're interpreting the piece, but all of that was done in preparation to it. If the audience has had no preparation, they have very little to go and experience it. So today's, not for everyone, but for many people who have been denied a music education that would equip them with that, they lose the joy and the ability to appreciate the subtlety and the profoundness of great music. And what that entails, I think, is a commitment towards music education. In kind of wrapping up our talk, at least this first talk, I think we could continue. I hope that you've enjoyed the meeting Yuri Liberzon and get a little bit more of an idea what it takes to become a great classical guitarist. It takes family. It takes good teachers.
It's a village.
It's more than a village. But there are contributing forces along the way, including some things that have to do with, we might say, which were adversity, because a change in location had an emotional impact, which propelled you to be able to look for answers that you could only find through your inner self, and with the aid of being able to find that voice and expression through music. And ultimately develop an ability to be disciplined, to recognize weaknesses and strengths, and to have the boldness. I mean, I don't think I would have had the boldness to send a note to Manuel Barrueco. and the extraordinary, this is another part where it's so important for people who gain great prestige in music, who take care to be looking for others. I mean, there's stories of Franz Liszt and his many students, and how he would teach them for free, some of them because he could see the potential, and they lived with him. He wanted them to succeed. For Barrueco to have taken an interest in a student he had never met and give you little tests by asking you to do a few things and then to follow through with it, that was quite extraordinary. And I think that is a testament to not only your skill at that age, but also to his character and his willingness to reach out. And you've maintained a friendship throughout this, which is and a professional relationship, which also testifies that schooling did not end. Some students, when they finish their 4 years.
He was always more than a teacher to me. I think he is still an inspiration and an artist who to this day I learn from. So
that is great. Well, till the next time, and feel free to write to Yuri. You can find him. His website is
yuriguitar.com.
yuriguitar.com.